Hi, my name is Bonnie Zimmer, and I'm an artist teacher with a show currently here at TAF. I've been a maker ever since I was a child, and I also have been a full-time artist and art teacher for over 40 years. As a child, I learned to knit and sew by the age of 10. I had a great sewing teacher in middle school, and so I ended up making all my own clothes in high school. So making was in my blood. I went on to Indiana University to be an art major, and I ended up getting a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree in textiles, where I got an amazing grounding in technical aspects of textiles. I also had some fabulous African art history classes that would go on to inform who I am as an artist today as well. I decided that I would be a full-time art teacher as a career and an artist on the side. And so I began teaching in 1974, and I ended up teaching art in the public schools at every level, from elementary all the way to high school, over the course of a number of years. In 1999, I went to St. Joseph's College and started a small art program there, where I taught for 14 years and retired as chair of the little art department in 2016. So since then, I've had the luxury of making every day of my life. I've started doing a few art fairs, and so again, I make art just about every day. If I don't want to challenge myself too much, I just play and have some fun making wearable art, beaded in copper jewelry, tie-dyed and eco-dyed clothing. And when I want to challenge myself artistically, I make what I call my serious art. And so most of the exhibition is made up of that serious art. Over the years of having 4 Indiana Arts Commission artist grants to help support me in my art making and exhibiting, and so that's been really wonderful, and I cherish being an Indiana artist and part of that whole fabulous network. So if you ask me what kind of art do I make, it's a little bit of a complicated answer. As you'll see in my show, it's quite varied. It ranges from vessels, what some people might call baskets, to sculptures, to wall pieces that might include printed textiles. So my range of media is quite varied, and my processes are quite varied. Since college, though, I have been making what have been labeled as contemporary baskets, and somebody says, well, what is that? And I like to think of it as baskets or vessels, interestingly constructed, that hold ideas instead of things necessarily. So I have one of my vessels here in the show, but I have been doing vessels for over 40 years, and so that's something that I continue to return to. Technically, I love all sorts of different techniques, including traditional techniques such as weaving, coiled basketry, crochet, you'll see a range of things in the show, to non-traditional techniques such as drilling holes into bark and metal and stitching it together. You might even see a plastic cable tie to hold something together that I can't sew through. I love to use reclaimed materials. I've always had a spot in my heart since the very first Earth Day in 1970, when we were challenged to make a basket out of materials someone threw away. And so you will see materials that I have come across in my path and reclaimed in the artwork. I kind of like to take a nod toward our throwaway culture. I think we don't really value the resources we have, and so you'll see that element in my work as well. So let's take a look at the show. So I'm really excited to share with you my exhibition that's here in the Taft Northwest Gallery, called A Show of Hands. And it's kind of a quirky exhibition. It was inspired by a number of different sources, and I won't go into great detail, but I will say that I owe some great debt to artists from millennia ago, from the Aboriginal people who would place their hands on the wall of a rock and blow minerals into the negative spaces to leave a perfect stencil imprint of their hands. And I've always found that so fascinating, and I guess they were simply saying, I was here. And that's kind of what the hands in my show are about. It's me being a senior citizen during a time of COVID saying, I'm still here. And so every hand you see in here can even think of that as a celebration of life, so to speak. Another culture that I need to mention briefly that I'm indebted to for this show are the Native Americans of the Ohio Hopewell culture. They buried in their burial mounds beautiful effigy hands, and it was believed that that connected the humans with the spirit world. And so you'll even see I appropriated one of those beautiful images onto my banner here, but that is the Hopewell hand. And the Art Institute of Chicago has one in mica. it's so beautiful. I think it's just the perfect artistic style and form. So anyway, you're going to see hands throughout my show in a wide range of media, material, and scale. And one of my goals was to kind of have a continuum of the tiniest hand to the biggest hand. So let's take a look at some of them. I want to thank my husband here. Of course, with our telephones and emojis, you can't not just borrow those emojis for that pure hand communication, but my husband was kind enough to sit for my plaster casting of these hands, and so you can decide if they're positive or negative, but had a lot of fun with those. Moving on, you're going to see some of the other things that I do. I love to do assemblage stitcheries that combine found materials and natural materials. And so this one I call, Where's Waldo's Hand? I actually just tucked a little copper hand into this sort of study of materials and objects, and so you'll see a fun little copper hand here. So part of my process is just finding materials and responding to them, and so I had cast these hands. I had this piece of black walnut bark, and one day they just said to me, oh wow, these will nest right into that bark. And so after I created this kind of nonsensical piece, I thought it related to the surrealists of the early 20th century and their crazy anti-art, and so René Magritte is a favorite surrealist of mine, and so I dedicated this piece to him, Surreal Sleeve. This is one of my eco-dyed pieces that I didn't quite know where I was going with this, but I ended up calling it, I had the strangest dream. And so this one was just the random printing of leaves and natural materials, and my mother had a hunk of lead, and I thought, wow, that would cut nicely. And so I cut out some little lead hands and did some embroidery and added some sticks and some feathers, and I thought it made quite a fun, fantastical piece. If we move on around, I found this fabulous piece of metal laying in the middle of Highway 231 and thought, oh, this is fabulous. So this piece that you see was a piece that I found in the middle of the road, not even 3 months ago. And in making pieces for the show, it just cried out to me that it wanted to be a mesa with another sort of surrealist fantasy construction around it. So you'll see another lead hand added to it and some rocks, but just another one of my playful, spontaneous pieces, because a lot of my process these days is simply laying out interesting materials and then composing in response to those materials. One of my goals was to do some self-portraits, and so if you'll see, this is self-portrait one. I have this old arthritic hand, and I was actually substitute teaching for a while, and I was teaching crochet to the students, and so I thought, wow, I'll see if I can crochet my hand, and so you'll have to see what you think, if it's a pretty good replica right down to my bent finger and my wonky knuckles, but it's made of hemp and just crocheted. Yes, I pulled a couple of pieces out from other creation times and thought, I could add some hands to this and make quite a nice piece. So this was a piece actually created for a show called Through the Window, and it was never quite, I was never quite satisfied. So I thought, oh wow, let's add some hands to this, and by golly, it worked. So if you'll notice, I have a beautiful little forged hand that I cut out and textured and patinaed. There's another little one here, a little lead one here. But these are just things that I found out in my yard. We have wild turkeys and cicada shells and some rocks that came from Lake Michigan. Don't tell the rangers, no. Anyway, it's quite a fun piece. Now this grouping here was probably the most significant work that I did for this show. I knew that I wanted to create some interesting hands. And one of my signature items is to take the stems from an ear of sweet corn. Bill and I eat sweet corn, and so I save the husks, I save the stems, and I use them in my work. And the very first piece, I'm going to bring you over here for just a second. The very first piece I ever did with corn stems as fingers was this piece. This was an old antique handle for an iron that people used to clip to a big iron, put it on the wood stove, heat it up, and then iron their clothes with it. And this handle was removable. They could have several irons heating and hook the handle to it. Anyway, my mother gave this to me, and somehow these were near this, and it just realized these could be fingers. And so it's this very quirky, kind of strange hand. And so these corn stems have been appearing as fingers in my artwork for the last several years since I made this piece. So with that said, if we come back over here, I use corn stems in this piece, but this grouping is called present. Being a former teacher, you know, you're calling out roll, here, here, present. And so, again, I see each of these as kind of a unique individual roll call by each of these hands. Curly willow is also another signature material that I grow out in my yard. So this is a curly willow branch. These are some curly willow little branches that I cut and sawed and carved and sanded and ended up just being, this is present number 1. Here's another one, I don't know. Again, I had a whole set of materials laid out and I simply played and came up with this grouping of 5 very individual hands. This is a beautiful piece of black walnut bark, curly willow that hasn't been peeled, just cut off carefully and sanded. I hated giving up my planter plate. It was part of my antique collection, but anyway, I thought it needed it in the presentation. You'll notice rocks, found materials often come together. I feel like when we put these rusty things with these natural things, I'm creating a balance between humans and nature that we so desperately need. Here's another little present piece. Again, just looking at the wood, paying attention to it, cutting it at a place that made it work as a hand. This one I actually whittled each of the fingers with a X-Acto knife, had a great time doing that. So anyway, this is my series called Present. On the largest end of the scale, I knew I wanted to create a giant peace sign because heaven knows we sure need some peace in this world. And so I had some old rolled up chicken wire that were rabbit fences around my former gardens. And so I just began sculpting. I spent about a week making this thing and my scars are finally healed up. It was quite a brutal experience. But this is my peace sign. And then if you step over here and do a little zoom, I also did a little piece. This is embroidery, and I'll hold this up for you. This is embroidery, and I call it Precious Diversity. And if you notice, it has black and brown and red and beige and pink thread. The idea is we all can live together as one. So that's a little conceptual piece. This I actually did in 2007. It was one of my first pieces that I did that had actual hands in it. I call it Gratitude Medallion. And this is a traditional coiled basket technique that has the initials of family members, friends, and teachers who all really influenced my development and growth as an artist and a person. So this is kind of my commemorative effigy to those people. One of my favorite new processes that I've learned is called eco-dyeing, where I actually gather green leaves from my yard, and in a natural dye process, I can lay it on the fabric. I won't go into detail, but it gets rolled up and steamed in a steamer, and the tannins in the leaves actually print on the fabric. And so my goal with this was to create this beautiful medallion, sort of a mandala of peace, also to send into the world. And then these are actually tracings of my copper hands, like little kids do in kindergarten to make a turkey. Well, I traced on some paper and made a pattern because I wanted to spread the love of peace of the mandala. One more piece that I'd like to show you that I spent, I really don't know how many hours. If you want to come around this way, swing around here, because this is my favorite view of the piece. This is my self-portrait number 2, and if you look closely, this is a coiled technique using linen, and I literally sculpted my hand using a basketry technique, and it's got my arthritic bent fingers, and I really enjoyed doing it. I wanted to show you the vessel, which is kind of my signature thing, that's in the exhibition. It's called Guardian Spirit Vessel, and it has corn hands in it. This is created with barks and metal and curly willow and things also out of my yard. And I really enjoy the inclusion of these kind of special guardian hands that are in this piece. But again, this is one that you need to walk all the way around to enjoy all the details. And one of my goals for my viewer with all of my pieces is to try to take you someplace you haven't been before, show you something you wouldn't see if I hadn't created this for you. So this piece, if you look closely, you'll continue to discover little things that I put there just for you. The show was inspired by a number of things, and my mother, who will be 99 next month, created pieces using hands several decades ago. So I know that implanted in my heart and my brain too, and she allowed me to bring a couple of her pieces to have as guest artist in the show. So one is a fabulous casting of her hand. This was actually done in the 1960s, and I've grown up with this, and I love it. This was a piece she did for a course she took where they required them to have some human anatomy, but again, she made a mold of her hands and cast them. And then she also was a potter, so this is a piece, self-portrait piece that she did of something she loved. But these are also pieces that definitely inspired the concept of this show. On this side, you'll see some jewelry. As I said, sometimes I like to just play and make jewelry and clothes if I don't want to think too hard. So I thought, oh, I've got to put a little jewelry in here. So these are some different hand pendants that I created for the show. Had one set of pieces I'd like to show you are my crazy corn stem finger hands. We ate a lot of sweet corn this summer. I saved all the stems. And so each of them told me what kind of hand they needed to be in. So it's just, I had my junk boxes out, and these are just totally crazy constructions made of random materials. But I just think they're so fun, and each one has their own personality, from these big, creepy, long fingers to these little ones, to this one that I thought looked like someone with their pinky out to have a cup of tea. Well, thanks for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed a glance at my show. Thank you.